Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening and joining this live stream. In this chat, I'd like to talk about trade unions and the role that they have played and the role that they could possibly play today in opposing globalization if they're prepared to reinvent themselves and actually represent the working people of the West. So just a quick sort of history. Trade unions were initially very socialist in their construct. And if you sort of get onto Google or something and Google something called the Internationale, which is like the socialist workers of the world unite type song. So it's very much a Marxist or a socialist rather construct back in the day, and it was seen as the workers opposing capital. Now that morphed over time, particularly as the West became more middle class and a working class job, say in a factory, could render someone affluent enough to own property and go on annual vacations and have a family and that sort of thing. So it kind of changed the thing. Now the trade unions were being heavily infiltrated by Soviet communist agitators. So the Russian communist state was very much looking at trade unions as a way of infiltrating the West, undermining the West, and spreading industrial mayhem to undermine the West and so on. Now there was the workers' unions or the heavy industrial unions that were part of their target, but they also targeted the clerical unions, particularly teachers' unions and academic unions. And the Russian agitators believed that if they could find a gay or a lesbian academic, then they really hit the jackpot. This would be a person that was going to be very susceptible to the socialist communist ideology, and they put a lot of work into teachers' unions and academic unions and so on, and quite successfully. And the result of their work we can even see today, just how left-wing the unions are and anti-capitalist and so on. But unions evolved, and they were by the 1970s and 1980s. There were some very militant unions, by the way, that were hardly realistic in terms of the sort of practices they were employing to get their own way. But these were in times of inflation and so on, and they were trying to get catch-up pay rises. So the needs of the union and the activity of their leaders and the reality of global economics at the time, you could kind of see that there was going to be they were going to butt heads over some key issues around pay and working conditions and the like. But there were abuses. Clearly, there were union abuses then that needed to be addressed. But during the 1980s, in particular, most unions were crushed or neutralized. Now, some were crushed in the more militant ones, in particular, and things like, say, the Air Traffic Controllers Union in the United States, for example, was one that was crushed and neutralized. But in other cases, teachers' unions didn't receive that same treatment. And really, you see any unions that were helpful to the globalization project, such as teachers' unions, because they could spread climate change propaganda and all sorts of things through the schools. Those unions were left alone, or even rewarded, or enhanced, or at the very least not harassed or neutralized. So there was a divergence there between the unions that were going to oppose or were seen as opposing or potentially opposing the globalization project, and those unions that would in some way facilitate the globalization project. And the teachers' unions was one of those ones that was deemed as facilitating the globalization project, which is why they're still so influential today. They could easily crush if any government had the will or intention of doing it, but they just don't, because again, the globalists are saying, hey, the teachers' union's good for us and helps us spread our globalist project message around. So that's it. So, but trade unions recently, particularly with the medical situation going on around the world at the moment, which is clearly a globalist, if ever there was a globalist orchestrated scam, then this is it. So the there's various governments issuing these edicts, hiding behind emergency decree powers. The parliaments haven't voted on this. It's just emergency decree powers they're using, and the executive is just issuing executive orders to do this. That workers have to take vaccines that they don't want to, or don't want at least to be forced to by diktat. So this is going to the working people, whether it be nurses unions or construction unions and those sort of people. Some of these people are taking exception to these requirements, and they're going to the street and they're marching and protesting and so on, which is their right. Now, what's happened in Australia recently, and this is the last sort of few days really, this all sort of started to unravel, is that some of the union heavies, the people at the apex of the unions, who are no friends of government and don't give a shit about globalization, but they've suddenly come out very, very strongly in favour of the globalist ordained medical requirements, and telling their members to do it. You know, the government's telling you to do it. You do it. It's good. Hey, you know, I want you to do it. Your union says to do it, and this is a sudden change in attitude. And there's all sorts of allegations running around, and I haven't been able to verify any of them, but there's all sorts of allegations running around that various globalist instrumentalities, if I can put it that way, have paid very substantial money to the heads of the unions and their upper echelons to get them to spread propaganda amongst the members, to tell the members to accept this dictated medical advice, not medical advice, medical orders, and to accept it and to do it without question and to get on with it and so on. And also propaganda that if they disagree with it, then they're far right-wing Nazis and they're this and they're fascists and so on. So clearly the government publicity propaganda machine is working hand in glove with these people. So if they get any resistance, straight away the media, you know, the globalist-owned media is out with stories of Nazis and fascists disagreeing with it, but the good people are going along with it. And so obviously it's a globalist play. So these claims that the union heavies have been accepting millions of dollars in bribes to try and convince the union members to go along with these medical diktats. It's starting to look like it's probably true. Again, I haven't been able to verify it, but why union bosses should suddenly turn around and tell their members, and even using the globalist talking points when they're doing it, so suggesting they've been given their speeches to read, then why would they just do that? They're either been threatened or they've been bribed or a bit of both. So that seems to be the case. But just looking more broadly at the union's role, the unions, as the West was being globalised and millions of black and brown peasants were coming to the West, lowering wages, reducing the living standards of the working class that the union is supposed to represent, for Christ's sakes. While all that was happening, the gig economy, that people losing their accrued benefits in terms of retirement benefits or sick benefits and various health benefits and so on, as all that was being stripped away, the unions just very tamely rolled over, as did their political representation in the governments around the Western world. You know, the Democrats is a case in point in the United States, or the Labor Party in Britain and Australia. The politicians just rolled over and sold out their workers and their workers' rights and their workers' benefits, their workers' purchasing power, sold it all out to the globalists. And so a very small elite of politicians have become very, very rich out of this. But the population at large has suffered greatly. For example, since 1970 to the current day, the purchasing power of the paycheck has fallen by between 55 and 60%. That's just to reduce. So even if you have a double income household on the average wage today in the West, it has less purchasing power than a single wage did 50 years ago. That's how far things have deteriorated, and that's how much the unions have rolled over on this. Now, I believe that the unions, because of this pushing and shoving, the unions now have a role to play in preventing globalization. They have a role to play, saying, no, there's going to be no more immigration, skilled immigration only. And I mean skilled. I don't mean skilled at washing dishes or skilled at these Indian programmers that can't write a line of code to save their lives are being brought out allegedly as genius programmers. None of that sort of stuff. Actual, real, tested, verified skills. Sure, those people are welcome, and should always be welcome, by the way. Skilled migration should always be welcome, but it has to be skilled and skills that are needed. And to stop the mass migration, that should be off the table. To stop foreign investment. I mean, half the residential real estate in Australia now is owned by Chinese conglomerates, and this has forced up the price of rents and housing costs. They're just out of sight. I mean, houses that were $75,000 a house 20 years ago are now $1.5 million a house. That's how insane it is, even in areas that aren't necessarily they wouldn't have been considered middle class sort of 20 years ago. So unions have a role to play, and they can shut a whole country down, and they've got a role to play in preventing the further spread of globalization, because it's destroying the West. It is destroying the West, it's destroying everything the West has built up over many hundreds of years. The wealth, the systems, the processes, the certainties of life, they're all being taken away by the globalization project. And as governments have sold out to the globalists, or they're not even sold out, they're owned by the globalists. And as business, big business in particular, sees that globalization is going to serve their purposes in some way, then unions are the last thing. Now, they've been neutralized, but through various processes of boiling frog type deception. I think this medical situation today around the world, I think that could reignite unions. They need to get rid of their current leadership. All the leadership is either sold out to or susceptible to the globalist money or message. So they need to get rid of those, and they represent the workers in their countries. I think now's the time for the unions to reinvent themselves and play a role. You've been with Tassel's today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.